So, it's 2 weeks until the first closed-door F1 test in Barcelona, a month and a half until the first race of the season in Melbourne, and a couple of days out from the first team's livery launch, which is Red Bull, so I'm sure it'll be groundbreaking. So what do we all really need to know with so much changing for Formula One's 2026 season? Kia ora, I'm Kimmy, I talk F1 in the world's second worst accent, and here's 10 things you need to know before sitting down to watch Formula One cars on track in 2026. Firstly, don't believe everything you're hearing out of the closed-door test that starts on the 26th of January. Rely on proper sources like the official F1 site and actual Formula One journalists rather than what you're seeing reposted by random people on social media. Also, be wary of accounts that constantly share misleading or even flat-out false information that's sourced from other social media accounts that also have zero credibility. This is rife on X/Twitter at the moment. Keep an eye out for it. Recently, you might have seen that Audi was out and about doing a shakedown of its new car, and the internet's already been hit with AI-doctored images that spread around pretty quickly. So if you saw this picture right here and think it's real, take a closer look. You are going to see AI-generated shots that claim to be cars crashing or spinning or catching fire that supposedly came from the test later this month. But unless it's come from a team's account or F1 itself, then just assume it's fake. Why? Because this is a true closed-door test. No photographers, no media, no news crews. It's not organised by F1 or the FIA, and it's an independent test that has been scheduled by the teams directly with the circuit. Could someone conceivably leak images? For sure. Could somebody take a long lens up into the hills of Montemelo and get some footage? Again, for sure. But be wary of sensational headlines and imagery, and don't believe everything that you see, hear or read. Think twice before reposting something, and definitely do not believe anything you see on Facebook. This is a prime opportunity for people to make money from AI slop channels as well, and they're running rife here on YouTube at the moment. Question everything. There's a lot of people out there who are easily fooled by these sorts of channels, and once something starts spreading, even if it's debunked, it's really hard to shove that cat back in the bag, you know? Secondly, the important dates. The first private closed-door test is from the 26th to the 30th of January in Barcelona. Official Bahrain testing runs over 2 3-day periods, first on the 11th to the 13th of February, then the following week on the 18th to the 20th. Both of these will be televised. Then the first Grand Prix weekend of the season is in Australia, which is from the 6th to the 8th of March, which is 10 days earlier than last year, so set your calendar reminders for that one. Summer break starts on the 27th of July and everyone comes back in the Netherlands on the 21st of August. The season finale in Abu Dhabi is on the 6th of December, which incidentally is my dad's birthday. Now for the interesting stuff. Let's talk regulations and jargon. The third thing you'll want to brush up on is the acronyms and language used for various different components and driver tools. The old overtake or energy deployment button is now called the boost button. And similarly, there is a specific push-to-pass overtake mode, which has been abbreviated to MOM or manual override mode, MOM, which I'll get into in a minute. Expect to hear recharging used much more frequently in 2026, and with DRS no longer a thing, the new active aerodynamics will have 2 main settings, which are cornering mode, where the aero switches to a higher downforce setup for better grip and maneuverability, and straight mode, where everything opens up to make the car a little bit more slippery. The fourth point is about the power units. So, as you probably know, the internal combustion engine is still a 1.6 litre turbocharged V6. However, the hybrid component of the power unit will be putting out approximately half of the total horsepower available to drivers, which is 3 times as much as before. But when it comes to watching the racing for this year, there's going to be a lot more complexity around when that power is delivered around a lap and how the drivers choose to manage both recharge and deployment. Expect to see some teams and drivers take a little bit longer to fully understand the best way to manage this. Now, recharging comes from both braking and lifting coast, and also at points when the car is clipping depending on the engine map. Now, if you don't know what clipping is, or derating, it's basically when the car is at full throttle but the power unit profile is set up to harvest once a specific amount of battery is deployed. This usually happens at the end of long straights when a huge boost has been provided at the start to get the maximum speed quickly. Theoretically, the battery will charge twice as fast as the previous generation PU, even though the MGUH or the heat recovery unit is no longer a part of the system, but twice as quick with 3 times as much to charge still means it will take longer to get a full tank of juice. So the actual manner of overtaking, I expect, will be very track dependent. There'll also be a new balance defined between attacking and defending, and and even more games of cat and mouse where a driver chasing will take advantage of the lower energy stores of the one in front. This isn't new, it's just something that will probably be much more of a big deal and may very well replace the DRS games that we've seen in the past. Or it will, because there's also overtake mode, which is point number 5. Overtake mode is effectively a power-based replacement for the old DRS. Just like DRS, there will be zones where overtake mode is allowed to be used when the chasing car is within 1 second of the one in front. What it does is it sustains the energy output of the battery for longer, meaning the car is running that extra 350 kilowatts, or in language I understand, about 470 horsepower, up until the point of a regulated ramp down speed where that PU is required to reduce the output of the battery to 0. This happens between 337 kph and 355 kph, or 209 miles an hour and 221 miles an hour. Basically, when the car hits 337 kilometers an hour, the battery will step down its deployment from the full 470 horsepower relative to the speed until it theoretically hits 0 at 355 kilometers an hour. I hope that makes sense. I am not sure how well I explained that. What this in theory should do is allow the chasing car to reach its maximum output faster than the one in front, and thus allow them to pass on the straight. What it also means is the battery management will be absolutely key when it comes to the ability for drivers to use this tool effectively, particularly if they're having to defend from a car behind as well, because they will have to use their battery over the course of a lap to manage that defense, and then they might not have enough power left to make the best use of manual override mode. So while DRS trains will be a thing of the past, we're probably still going to see situations where certain drivers seem to be able to make their cars wider than the others on the circuit purely through virtue of superior battery management, and forcing their opponents into situations where they're having to use a bunch of their electrical energy to defend. What this means is that it will be possible, if a driver is too aggressive on the boost or overtake buttons, for them to be trundling around the circuit with only 550 of that potential 1,000 horsepower on board. It might also mean that on tracks that have lower downforce requirements and had less of a DRS effect, that we see the opposite phenomenon, because electrical power isn't affected by things like thin air at high altitude or circuits that are low downforce. Although obviously car setup will still come into play in those kind of situations. So speaking of car setup, point number 6 is the active aero, and how both cornering and straight mode will be used. Straight mode just cracks me up. I've been in straight mode since 2006. So realistically, as much as we're not using DRS as a term anymore, the active aero is basically DRS. It just affects more than the rear wing. It also has the front wing elements and can be used on every lap at racing speed, regardless of how far behind a car is from the one in front. There's still specific zones where it can be used in the low downforce configuration, and the rest of the lap has to be done in cornering mode, but theoretically the allowed usage of straight mode will be more than the old DRS of the past, as at this stage I believe it's any straight that's expected to be 3 seconds long or more, and the movable components will just return to the high downforce configuration when the driver lifts off to brake into the next corner. Now how that's going to work on full throttle corners like 130R at Suzuka, well, that's going to be a little bit interesting. Next up, let's talk about qualifying. And the 7th thing you'll want to remember is that with 22 cars now on the grid, the qualifying format will have just a small change, with the old system of 5 cars out in both Q1 and Q2 moving to 6 cars being dropped out of each of the first 2 stages of qualifying. 10 cars will still go into Q3, but rewire your brains to remember it's the bottom 6 who'll go out in Q1 and Q2. The timings, they won't change though, so with 2 extra cars out there in Q1, it might be even trickier for people to avoid the impeding allegations, particularly on short circuits like Austria or tight ones like Monaco. Now, before I get into the last couple of points, I am going to ask you to give this video a like if you're getting value from it, and if you're not already subscribed, then consider clicking that button and hitting the notification bell, because let's be real, YouTube fills up the homepage nowadays with shorts, and I am crap at those. Every time you watch one of my videos to the end, you're helping me pay off my credit card bill from Melbourne last year, so I can use it for a big F1 trip I have planned for this year. My in-laws are taking me and Biz to the Isle of Man TT in May to celebrate some big birthdays and anniversaries, and I'm not going all the way to the other side of the world without attending a Grand Prix, or 2. If you really want to help a girl out, then sharing my stuff with like-minded people is a huge boost as well. And I mean, I'm never going to post my own stuff on Reddit, am I? Alright, On to point number 8. Expect the conversation around engine compression ratios to rage on throughout the season. Now, I'm not going to get into the fine details of exactly how complicated this all is, but the TLDR of it, for those who aren't aware of the loopholes some engine manufacturers are reportedly exploiting, is that, as is always the case, the regulations have been interpreted differently by different manufacturers. The allowed compression ratio is lower than previous and measured at ambient temperature because you can't exactly go into an engine when it's running to check its cylinders are compliant. Mercedes and Red Bull are reported to have interpreted this as long as it complies when measured, it's legal. Some other teams have worked towards ensuring their cylinders remain as stable as possible to remain as close to compliance as is allowed by physics during all times, which is also something stated in the regulations. All cars must comply at all times. Now, I'm sure the argument will be tied up at some point in the early stages of the season to give the losing side time to develop for next year, but the fact is that it's too late for any changes to be made from either side of the fence for 2026, so it's likely that both Mercedes and Red Bull powertrains powered cars will have a slight horsepower advantage for this season at least, even if they're told they have to make changes for 2027. It's not like they're going to be told they have to change it or not compete, right? For those cars running the engines where the ICE has been developed to increase the cylinder volume while the engine is in operation, it might be entirely possible we see some serious reliability issues. First-gen power units always have their teething problems, but when you're pushing the boundaries of physics, well, if you're taking PU penalties midway through the season, is that extra 13 horsepower worth it? I can't wait to find out how this all plays out and if those engines are going to be as reliable as the other ones. Finally, point number 9, it's contract status time. Officially, 15 of the 22 drivers on the grid this year have contracts confirmed to be up for renewal, including those with options on either side. Colapinto, Alonso, Stroll, Hamilton, Beerman, Ocon, Antonelli, Russell, Hadjar, Lindblad, Lawson, Bortoleto, Hulkenberg, Albon and Sainz could theoretically head to other pastures come 2027 without much resistance. And even though Max Verstappen's contract is technically until 2028, I think it's fair to add him as well, taking the total up to 16. Now, as it's the first year of a new regulation set, it's pretty likely that silly season this year could get a little bit fruity. Sure, chances are most of these guys will stay where they are, barring the odd contract non-renewal. However, if some teams really get it wrong and the potential comes up for a seat in a team that really gets it right, there might be the odd shock signing. Think Charles Leclerc finally giving up on his Ferrari dream, or George Russell not even bothering to renegotiate and running off to Red Bull or something. Even drivers on multi-year deals that should run beyond the end of the season may very well start looking for outs in their contracts. And if somebody like, say, McLaren gets it wrong and the Mercedes PU isn't as good as everyone thinks it's going to be, well, I'm sure there's a bunch of teams out there willing to pay big bucks for a world champion. So that's 9 things you need to look out for in the 2026 Formula One season. What are you keeping an eye on? Chat about it down in the comments and don't forget to click those important buttons. As always, a massive thanks to my patrons. I will be working on getting up the championship tracker spreadsheet for this season over the next week or two so you can have fun with punching in all the various permutations of how things might play out. I've also recently launched my website kimi.nz where I'll be selling my artwork. I'm still working on getting inventory up there and it's mostly print on demand as art is complicated stuff to send, but patrons do gain access to a 15% discount as well as ad-free videos and your name in my thank you list. I'll see you on Thursday with 10 races to watch during the off season. In the meantime, check out one of these if you're in the mood for some more F1 stuff. Ka kite.